So this is going to be leading into the second assignment for the self-portrait. And so there's a couple different ways you could go about this. So I'm going to go to the P5 editor and log in. Oops. Okay. And so I'm going to open up my self-portrait and just take a look at it. So the internet is being pretty slow. Oh, it's taking me to GitHub for some reason. That's not what I want to do. Oh, now I'm not logged in. Huh. Okay. I'm going to go back to the self-portrait I created the other day, and then log in again, I guess. I don't know what's going on. Okay. So here's the self-portrait I created the other day. It's pretty goofy, but you know, I'm just using some basic shapes as a demonstration. And so what I want to do is demonstrate how it's actually simpler to make a self-portrait like this using variables. And so there's a couple different ways I can approach this. One is I can take what I've already got and break down the numbers and create variables out of those numbers. The other thing I can do is just start from scratch. So I'm going to do one where I start from scratch, and then I'll quickly do another one where I break down the numbers. So I'm going to start a new sketch first. So I'm just going to go to new. Well, actually, I'll make a new window because I want to keep this open as a reference. So I'll make a new tab and go to the editor. And so I'm going to call this self-portrait with variables 1. And I'll make my code a little bit bigger so you guys can see it. And I'm going to get started. So I'm going to start with a simpler one because the triangle is kind of tricky to start with. So I'm just going to start with a similar thing, but I'm just going to use the basic shapes first, and then I'll do the triangle later. So I have a new sketch. I'm going to start as I normally do by making a comment. So I'm going to do a / and an asterisk, and then another asterisk / at the end, and then I can write my comment in between. So this is self-portrait. I don't know. I guess this is version 2 because I'm using variables with variables. And I'll just put the date 2/16/2022. So this is going to be what's required for the second self-portrait assignment. I'm going to save this. And so the variables are going to be useful for a couple different reasons. One is I can set these numbers. And so if you look at my self-portrait from before, I've got all these numbers. Some of them are the same, some of them are different, but none of them really tell me what they're for, right? Like just looking at it, if I look at this like 300 right here, I have no idea what that does, right? Just by looking at it. I'd have to like play with it or wiggle it around or something like that to figure out what that means. And then the other thing is I have to do all these calculations in my head, right? Like when I was moving my eyes around, like I have these two eyes, and I just have these two different numbers, and they happen to be, you know, equidistant from each other, from the center of the character, because they're symmetrical. But I had to like do all this math in my head, and then I put that math down here, and now I don't even know what that math is anymore because I did it in my head, and then I wrote down the number, and now it's gone. So variables are going to help me do two things. One is I'm going to know what the numbers are being used for because I'm going to have variable names instead of just the plain number. And then two, I'm going to be able to make changes to my design really easily by changing a variable because the variables are going to be linked to each other through math. So it's a little bit complicated, but hopefully you guys will see. So I'm just going to start out with some variables. And then I'm going to start designing, and then I'm going to kind of go back and forth. So normally I put my variables in the top part of my program. And the reason for that is something that we'll get into a little bit more depth later, but it's something called variable scope. So to quickly demonstrate, if I have a variable x here, and I say that's equal to 10, and then I go inside of my setup function, and I say variable y equals, let's say 20, okay? Then if I go into draw, and I try to draw an ellipse at x and y and 10, this is going to give me an error, okay? And x exists, x is going to be fine, but because I declared y, so remember when I say var, that's declaration, because I declared y inside of my setup function, it only exists inside of my setup function. So my draw function doesn't know that y exists. The x, it does, because I declared x outside of my outside of either of my functions. So when I hit play, see I get this red line here, and if I open up my console, it's going to say y is not defined. Okay, so all I have to do is move y up here, and now I can play, and it works. I can actually change y inside of setup because I've declared y, now it exists everywhere. So that's referred to as a global variable. So if I say, actually I want y to equal 100 inside of my setup function, now you can see it moves down the page. So I can reference y as long as I declare it up here. So that's why a lot of the time in your code, you're going to see your variables at the top and your functions afterwards. So these are my global variables. And I'm going to stick with x and y as the starting position of my self-portrait. So I'm going to think of x, y as this position, right? When we think of a graph, we have the x horizontal and the y is the vertical. And if we have like a character in a game or an animation or something like that, we're going to refer to their position as the x and y. So I'm going to move the xy a little bit. I'm going to move it to 200, 200. So it's in the middle of my canvas. And so now I have my circle, and I'm going to get started turning it into my self-portrait. And I'm going to kind of move back and forth between using variables and my drawing. So I'm going to close this setup function a little bit. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, cool. If you do have questions, let me know. I can stop. So the cool thing about having these xy values is now I have a center point that I can reference for my other variables. So let's say this is going to be my face. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit here. I'm going to say no fill. I'm going to say, or sorry, no stroke. And let's change the fill to that same plum color I was using before. And let's change the size a little bit. So make the size 100, maybe make it 200. Okay, so now I've got a starting point for my face, and I want to add in my eyes. So I'm going to make a new section and add in some eyes. So I'll change the fill. I'll say the fill is, I forget the color. There it is. So I'm just going to copy this from over here and paste it in here. So you may have already noticed this, but that plum, that's sort of a variable, right? Even though it's a string, it's a name that references a color, right? It's not just the word plum, but it's referencing it in a different part of our code, which is our CSS. So that's why it's a string rather than a variable. But we can actually assign strings to variables. So if I wanted to give, my colors some variables, I could say variable face color, and I could give that plum. So I'll copy that and put it there. Oops. And then I could say eye color, and that's equal to this color. And so now that I have those values stored in variables, I can replace the values with a variable. So I can say this is the face color, and this is the eye color, and it's still going to work. And now it's like I can change my self-portrait by just playing with these variables, and make a little bit more sense in a second when we use the colors multiple times. So we've got my eyes. So I want a couple more ellipses. And last time what I had to do is I had to say, you know, the center of my face is 200. I want to move over, so I'm going to add 50. And I put 250, and, you know, that would be it. But now I can start at X, and I can add. I can just say plus 50. And I can use Y again, so I don't have to even remember what that number is. I don't care. And now I can use a different number for the size. So I'll start with, let's try 40. And let's see how that looks. Okay, so that's pretty good. I maybe want to move up a little bit, so I could say Y minus something, like Y minus 10. And so now I moved up a little bit, maybe a little bit more, Y minus 20. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So there's my first eye. This is the left eye. And so now, what's cool about this, if I decide I want to move my face somewhere else, I can change X. So if I change X to like 10, my eye is going to move with the face. They both move because they're both relative to that position, right? Like they both reference this X value. The eye is just X plus 50. So if X changes, both of my shapes change. And so that's how I can do some animation. I can move my character around in my game. Like all sorts of different stuff is opened up by using variables instead of the raw data. All right, so now doing my right eye is really easy. I say ellipse. I know I'm going to start at X. That's the middle of my face. And I want to go in the other direction, so I'm going to do minus. And then I can do the same number as that. I can do a different number. If I want it to be offset, maybe I want it to be a little closer to the center. I could do minus 30. And I probably want them to be in the same Y area. So I'll do Y minus 20 again, and then just do the size. And now I've got my right eye. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Now I can, again, if I move my face, if I move Y down somewhere to like 300, the whole face moves with it. So if I wanted to do that with this self-portrait, I'd literally have to go through and change every number. And I have to add, you know, 20 or 30 or 40 or whatever to each one of my numbers. With this one, all I have to do is change one of these numbers once. So with a little bit of extra preparation and creating these variables, we can create a much more dynamic project. Okay, so I'm going to add the highlighting to my eyes like I did over here, just a little crescent thing. And so what I can do now is change the fill back to the face color. So now I don't even have to go look up, you know, I don't have to copy and paste. I just already know that this is the face color, and if I want to change it later, I can. So I'm going to change the fill back to the face color, and I'm just going to copy and paste these and move them around a little bit. Okay, so I have my right eye, my left eye. Right now it's covering the whole thing, but I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. So let's do 20 by 20 for the size. So maybe I can leave it like that, but I was going to move it up a bit. So how did I do this? I moved it up on Y, so I'll do Y minus 30. Okay, and then over on X, so I'll do like X plus 60, and then X minus 20. So now I'm doing some math. Maybe I should do like some offsets or something like that. But now I have my little bite out of my eye, so that looks kind of cool. And remember, if I want to change the face color, it's going to change both of those things, all three of the ellipses. So if I want to change this to blue, since I'm using a variable, it changes all of them to blue at the same time. So let's change this back to plum. And so as you start to program more, you'll start to notice, like if I'm doing a lot of math and I'm like adding numbers here and there, you might want to use variables. It might be more efficient. So like, for example, the math on these wasn't too bad, but you know, it's kind of off a little bit. So I might have said like, what's the offset of the I? And then I could have made a variable out of that. Okay, so let's do the mouth, and then we're gonna do one more thing, and then we'll be almost done. Any questions? Okay. So let's do the mouth. I'll just do this quick. So similar thing here, I'm going to use my rectangle, but I want to use rect mode center. So I'm going to use my rectangle. This time I'm going to do a stroke. So I'll do the stroke is the eye color, even though, you know, that's a little confusing. Maybe I should use a different name for that, but I know that I want it to match the eyes. And I'm going to do no fill for this one. And I'm going to make the stroke weight a little bigger. I'll do like maybe 4. And so again, with the rectangle, since it's centered, I can just do XY as a position. That'll put it in the middle of my face. And then for the size, I'll start with 100. I'm going to come back and do this in a second. And then for the height, I'll do 20 to start. And that looks okay. We're going to want to move it down. So I'm going to say Y plus maybe 50. Okay. And I'm going to want to, maybe I'll make the stroke weight a little bit wider. Okay. And let's add in our rounded corners. Okay. That looks pretty good. So now one thing that I can do really easily is I can move my self-portrait. And to demonstrate that, we're gonna go over this more in a later lesson, but I'm just gonna do this real quick. So I'm gonna say, instead of what I initially wrote, I'm gonna set mouse X to mouse X and Y to mouse Y. And now you'll be able to see that I can just move my self-portrait around with the mouse. So my mouse is actually changing that origin position, the XY, and everything's moving along with it. So that tells me that I'm using my variables correctly, because it's not, you know, some of the parts, if I was using hard-coded data, they would just stay where they were. Like, for example, if I just put 200 instead of X for the rectangle, now the mouth is moving part ways, but the X isn't moving. It's stuck because it's always going to be 200 as opposed to X, which can change. But what I can't do is change the size of the self-portrait. If I wanted to change the size, I would have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different numbers I'd have to change. So that's another thing that we can do. Instead of adding in our variables and then designing that way, we can also take the values that we have and then reverse to get the value that we want. So let's add the size. So the base size for my face is 200. I'm going to take this out for a second. So let's make a variable. I'm going to call this S for size. Part of why I'm doing that is because there's actually a function called size that does something else. And I'm just going to use the base value here. So I'm going to take this 200 and paste it in there. And I'll put size as a comment here because X, Y, we know what that means, but S could mean different things. So I want to make sure that people know it's for size. And now I can just put S there. I'm going to get the same drawing. But then obviously if I put S for the eye, that's not the right value, although that kind of looks cool. So now what I want to do is I want something that's relative to the original size. So I can reverse engineer what that value would be. So the original size is 200. The size of the eye is 40. So the difference is 5. If I do 200 divided by 40, I get 5. So I can do size divided by 5. And now I get the same eye size. So I can do size divided by 5 again, and I get that size. So then for 20, I can do the same math, although it's obviously just, twice as much. So 200 divided by 20 is 10. So for the little highlight, I can do s divided by 10, s divided by 10. And so that looks the same, so that's good. And then the width, so then I have the width of the mouth is half of the size, right? 100 is half of 200. So I can say size over 2. And then the height of the mouth is the same as the eye, or the highlight for the eye. So I'll just copy that and put that in there. And then 10 is half of that, half of that. So that would be s divided by 20. And then I also have this stroke weight, which I want to change. So that would also be 10. So that's also s divided by 20. So now if I want to change the size, if I want to change the size of the whole self-portrait to 20, oh, it didn't work. Oh, I know why it didn't work, but let's do a different number. Oops. Okay, so let's go back to 200. Okay, there's our self-portrait. Oops. If I make this like 300, okay, so one thing that didn't work is the spacing between the eyes and the mouth. So we can fix that. But you can see that the general design is getting bigger and smaller as I change the size. But yeah, the spacing isn't working because I didn't do the spacing relative to the size. So it is a little bit more complicated, but we can do that. But it does kind of look cool. So that's something in programming, you have a happy accident. I'm sure you guys have heard that term before, but when you do something by mistake, but it looks cool, so you keep it. But we have to make the offsets relative to the size as well. So like these numbers are how far the different parts are. So that's a bit complicated. So in cases like this, I may like do something where I say like variable s2 equals size divided by 2. So I don't have to keep doing all this division. Variable s4 equals size divided by 4. Variable s, what are the other ones that I need to do? 5 equals size divided by 5. 10. This isn't like the most sophisticated way to do this. Because what I would really want to do is like the eye size, the iris size, the mouth size, but I have a lot of different values. S20 equals size divided by 20. I think that's enough to get what I want. So this is just S5 now instead of size divided by 5. This is S10. This is S2. This is S10. Did I have an S20? Yeah, I did. Okay, cool. S20. I could also do like S10 divided by 2 if I want to do more stuff. Okay, so then I need for 50, I'm going to just do S4 for that. It'll be close enough. And then this for 20, 200 divided by 10, that's S10. So this one is S10. This part is getting a little more confusing, but S4. Just want to show you how this would work. That one's S10. Let's call this S2, or no, S4. And let's just do S4 here as well. Oh, crap. Okay, somewhere I messed up. S4. Oh, these are going to have to be the same. So let's do S. I kind of made this more complicated than I should have, because those irises are kind of hard to do. And I had the different asymmetrical offsets. What did I have as this? S plus 50. Okay, so let's just make these the same. So I'll do plus 50 and minus 50. So then this will be minus 40. Oh, yeah, that's the tricky part. I made this more complicated than I should have. Because these have to be a separate value. Anyway, I can do S4 for these guys and S10 for these guys. And then I'll just do S4 for these. And then these are going to be S4. Oh, it's because I have to, okay. No, I need another variable. So let's just call this the the I offset, and we're just going to set that equal to 10. So this is S4 plus I offset. This is minus S4 plus I offset. And this one is minus S10 minus I offset. And this one is minus S10 minus I offset. Okay, so now if I change the size, the whole thing changes. Or if I make it smaller, oh, it's still off. Oh no, I didn't do the mouth. Okay, sorry, I'm getting lost in the weeds a bit here. There we go. Okay. Anyway, it gets way more complicated. You guys don't have to worry about doing crazy offsets and all of this different stuff. The main idea is really just to have the X and Y so you can move your self-portrait around, so you can make it interactive. We'll look at other things that you can make interactive as well. But for now, we just want to add the X and Y variables so that you can move your character around. So yeah, and the way that you can test that, we'll go over this more, but if you just throw X equals mouse X and Y equals mouse Y, and then move your mouse around, you'll be able to see the whole self-portrait should move around as well. Okay, I'm going to stop recording.